A documentary film crew lost at sea and shipwrecked on a mysterious island full of monsters and intrigue. A billionaire who knows more than it seems, and his bodyguards struggling to keep him alive. An evil lurking in the jungle, stalking them in a deadly game. This is Point Nemo. Point Nemo is a one-shot sci-fi survival RPG launching Tuesday, November 2nd on Kickstarter. This is the second adventure written for the 3-2-1 action RPG rule set and is loaded with cool playable characters, crazy charts, malicious monsters, and wild weapons. This full-length adventure can be played over the course of one night or broken up into individual episodes and features several fun side quests and interesting island destinations. So if you're ready to rumble in the jungle, be sure to join us for some action, November 2nd on Kickstarter.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. He told me that today we were going to switch it up a little bit, and I was like, we're not going to talk about RPGs? Stu Horvath.
It's true. We're going back to back, too. Last week was Fighting Fantasy Adventure game books, and this week is a board game, which is kind of in the spirit of Fighting Fantasy Adventure game books, which is why we're talking about it back to back.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So what is it we're talking about?
Escape the Dark Castle. Ooh.
All right, I'm already sold on it. Go on.
Honestly, this game has been like mocking me for years now. I've seen the cover and I've just like, this looks so cool. But I thought it was produced by a company that I wasn't really into backing with my bucks. And I was totally wrong. It's totally by a small indie board game design company in Norwich, England called Themeborne. And as soon as I found that out, I was just like, Noble Knight, here I come. I bought all of the Escape the Dark Castle expansions, and there's a science fiction version called Escape the Dark Sector. Snag that too. And when all of their other peripheral stuff comes into stock, I will be hoovering all that up as well. That's how much I like this game. It's so good.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Like, sometimes being wrong feels so good,
right? Like, it's just like, you will look at this cover of this game and you will just be like, oh my God, this game looks awesome, because it looks like Castlevania the game. In a way, it sort of is. The idea is that you and 3 of your friends have been prisoners in the Dark Castle for a long, long time, and now you can escape. The castle is created by putting together a deck of cards, 15 cards, and then a boss at the end. And each card basically has an encounter on it. It could be a trap, it could be a social encounter, it could be a monster that you have to fight. And once you get past the encounter card, you get an item which are shared amongst the group. And those could be healing items, they could be weapons, they could be sort of like rune artifact things that kind of give you a specific effect that stays with you throughout the game. And you have a set amount of hit points. So I think with a 4-player game, everybody has 12 hit points. If one character dies, game over.
Really?
Yeah. So you all have to stay alive, or that's it. Now, the interesting thing is that your characters aren't big heroes or anything. You're the miller, the tanner, the smith, the tailor, the abbot, or the cook. So yeah, there's 3 stats, might, cunning, and wisdom. Might is a fist, cunning is an eyeball, and wisdom is a little star. They don't really correspond to any kind of like mechanical system that you'd expect. They correspond to the dice. Each character has a specific die. And on their character card, like the abbot has all 3 of his stats laid out. And his stars are 4, his fists are 3, and his eyeball is 1. And that basically is telling you how many of these symbols are on his die. It's a 6-sided die. So his wisdom, he's going to have 3 faces devoted to stars, 2 each of singles, and 1 has doubles, right? And doubles is surrounded by a shield. So all of this is used in combat or in skill tests. So basically, if you get a monster card, they're going to have a certain number of these same values stacked up against you. So like run into a demon and it's got like a fist and an eyeball, and then you roll a die for the number of people playing. So if you have 3 players, you roll the dice, you get 3 stars on top of that. Your job is to roll those things on your dice. Everybody rolls at the same time. And then whatever you roll, you take away from the monster. If the monster still has any dice left, he does damage, which is a set amount of damage. He does it to everybody around the table. You keep going until it's dead or you're dead. And basically these stats give you likelihood of rolling these things. If you roll doubles because it's in a shield, that means you don't take any damage. It's a really simple system. It plays super fast. You can pick this up at the table, like looking through the rules, like, fumbling through the game, and get through a session 30 minutes tops. The art is fantastic. It's not Russ Nicholson, but it's definitely done in that fighting fantasy style. The trappings of the castle, all of the text, like, has flavor text that you're supposed to read on the cards. There's no set turn order, so anybody can pick the next card and read it. The thing is that sometimes something very bad happens to the person who draws the card.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So like sometimes something really good happens to them too. Like you're rolling the dice, like, metaphorically and physically every time you pull a card. You basically just go through these 15 encounters. If you survive to the end, you fight a boss almost always really hard. And that's the game. It's fast paced. It's easy to pick up. It's atmospheric. It is a blast. Once you understand how the dice mechanic kind of works and how the better item cards that you can find can kind of synergize to like make you really effective at certain things, you start to kind of gauge whether it's worth fighting these monsters or just running away. Running away, usually you take a certain amount of damage, but they're also going to deliver damage if they kind of keep hitting you. So like if running away does 1 damage and they survive 1 round and do damage of 2, it's like, well, let's just everybody run. Sometimes you want to just beat that thing up so that you can get the reward. So there's all these cost benefit analysis that go into it, but it's all really fast paced. And there's just such risk built into every action that like the game builds like this really fun kind of tension. It's not like a terrifying tension. There's no dread. But it's like you're kind of square with the idea that you're going to die at the end. And it's a really hard game. We played twice. The first time through, the boss killed us. The second time through, I didn't play. I sat out because I was just like, well, you will entertain me because you're all going to die and it's going to be great. They actually beat the boss. I was really pissed off.
Oh, man. Yeah.
It was literally like our playthrough. The first playthrough was just monster after monster after monster at the beginning. So we just had all of this combat. And it really kicked the crap out of us. They had like weird trap, and they just kind of did a good job of like navigating them and avoiding stuff for the first 6 or so cards, so that they accumulated these items and they were just really well prepared for the rest of the gauntlet, and they made it through. It was very close, but they did make it through.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really impressive that a game actually builds in a running mechanic. Like there always, I think, needs to be the risk reward scenario that you don't often see in a lot of games, or you don't often see in a lot of RPGs, where it's just like, well, I just have to keep moving forward, shooting and hoping this works out the right way, where there's a lot to be said about a tactical retreat. And then like, going, all right, is it going to do 1 if I go or 2 if I stay? I'm going to go. And then, you figure it out later, So I think that's actually a pretty cool thing in a game where you are essentially trying to break out of somewhere and, get through everything. Like sometimes you have to go further back in to get your way back out.
Yeah, there's a cool tension here because like mechanically, the point of the game is just to get through whatever the 15 cards present to you. So like if you want to like kind of take the Munchkin mindset, like it's easy to kind of like puzzle that out. But there's like a narrative component to the game that like pushes against that and makes you make bad choices because they're funny or interesting, right? That's where the kind of cool part of the game is. Like you can just get really mechanical and get through the game that way, but like it's more fun if you kind of give yourself over to the narrative as if you were playing like a role in an adventure game book. You kind of make decisions that make sense to the characters rather than to the game, and you leave the meta part behind. And that is at direct odds with the mechanics of the game, right?
Right.
And I think that's really cool. And it makes for something that's kind of like, despite the fact that the game is sort of designed to be endlessly repeatable, like no castle is ever going to be the same because you have like a gigantic stack of cards in the main box. That's not even counting the
all the expansions you bought.
3 expansions significantly expand the game. It keeps it fresh on another level. Now, obviously, I made them lose the first time. My cynical nature brought them down. I attribute their success both to the luck of the draw and also to the group composition, which is cool. And like I don't know how you design to that. Maybe you don't. Maybe it's just luck, but it works super good. Like I said, it literally takes 5 minutes to learn this game and 30 minutes for a session. And like, it's just fun. And I like a lot of different types of board game experiences, but like, there's so few that are fast and fun. And I feel like this one is just going to immediately become part of like our heavy rotation.
That's great, man. And you know what? You can't have cynicism in a jailbreak. Everyone's got to be like really positive and excited about it, or it's not going to work.
Dude, you got to see these cards, man. There's a lot to be cynical about. I didn't like our chances from the start, and that's why we died. I think it's Alex Crispin does the art. The art is just fantastic. It just really catches that 80s adventure game book vibe. Everything is stark black and white with like scratchy cross hatching. The vibe is so good.
Yeah, man. Well, I can't wait to get my hands on it and give it a go. Do you have any final thoughts?
There are 3 expansions. I haven't delved too much into the rules. We just played it vanilla the first 2 times. Cult of the Death Knight, which, like, what a great name.
It's a great name.
It involves some sort of cultist mechanic. I believe you could join the cult for penalties and benefits. Scourge of the Undead Queen.
Great name, too.
Another great name. Introduces companions, and Blight of the Plague Lord has a plague mechanic. There's also, like I mentioned earlier, Escape from the Dark Sector, which is a science fiction one. It's a little bit more complicated. It looks like it takes like 15 minutes to learn, and sessions run 45 minutes to an hour. There's a little bit more of a tactical component, I think, just at a glance. I haven't taken too close a look at those rules, but same vibe, same art approach, black and white, super cool. They're out of stock at the moment, but there's a death book for Escape the Dark Castle, which I think you use to log your deaths, which is sort of like our board game log, except like funny and grim.
That's great.
There's a soundtrack, of course, on vinyl if you want it. I want it. And there's playmats. Like, everything is designed to look a certain way, and it all fits together in a great way. I find it aesthetically pleasing, to look at and in play. I can't say that about a ton of games. I have my favorites, but like, this is a step above.
Well, dude, I definitely want to check this game out. And we forgot to mention at the top of the episode, but we are going to do another indie RPG elevator pitch brought to you by our friends over at Exalt Funeral. Today, we're talking to Henry Taylor about his new game, Caer Mundus, The Lost Realm, which is out now. How's it going today, Henry?
Great. Thank you for having me, guys. I really appreciate it. Really happy to be here.
Absolutely.
Very cool. We're happy to have you too. Why don't you tell our listeners about Caer Mundus?
All right, yeah, straight into it. Well, Caer Mundus, The Lost Realm is a system agnostic book that I put together over the last few years. It is Bronze Age fantasy setting for those who like their fantasy low and grim. This is up your alley. It's very psychedelic in nature. I tried to make sure that there's a lot of touchstones to the natural world in it. So for those who want their fantasy a little bit more grounded and rooted in the soil where people walk as opposed to the skies where people fly, if that makes sense. This is really the kind of that kind of rooted, grounded, earthly fantasy game setting, which I tried to kind of realize and bring to life.
Speaking of psychedelia, I really like the art in this thing because, when people think psychedelia, they think bright, wild colors. And that being said, I think you have captured the feel of psychedelia without having to do it in full color, which I think is no small feat here. The art curation in this game is amazing.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. As curator, I'll take that as a personal compliment. Part of the fun of putting this book together was reaching out to friends, finding artists. So it's all sourced through myself. I'm not an artist myself. I'm certainly more of a writer, but in needing the art for the book, I knew that I had to reach out to various different people. And I think it's a kind of wild assortment. And I think that really speaks to the kind of chaotic nature of the setting because there's so many different styles. They all kind of match together. And as you say, it does add to that kind of psychedelic feeling and that kind of feeling of disassociating from occasionally reality and then slipping back into it,
So yeah, Hambone kind of beat me to the punch. I was going to bring up the fact that when I was reading the book, I was very much reminded of Ben Wheatley's A Field in England, which is also psychedelic and black and white, which is as Hambone said, you think of color when you think of psychedelics, and to really convey that through black and white is really interesting. But despite the different sort of historical era, like this is more of a Celtic vibe. Is there something sort of fundamentally like English or about Caer Mundus and this idea of psychedelicness in the natural world?
I think so. I can't speak for the American ecological system, of course, but over here in the UK, very much one of the kind of driving points behind Caer Mundus, for me personally, was to get in touch with our historical roots. And, you know, it was sort of a personal journey as much as anything else. I feel like I really tried to get that across in the book. When you're reading it, I hope that you're able to feel like you're at least be able to get in touch with the natural world in a certain way. And obviously, historically speaking, in the UK, the British Isles, we have natural species of hallucinogenic mushrooms like liberty caps and that sort of thing, which, although sort of modern society tends to kind of brush over, the further back in history you go, the more prominent these things become. So I'm thinking about things like the Druids, which are mentioned here, and of course, taken from real life, were very reliant on, we think anyway, very reliant on psychedelia, because you spend your life foraging through forests and fields in Britain, you're going to come across magic mushrooms, and they're a kind of way to put you in touch with another world. So they're a kind of portal, you know, they're kind of god flesh. To eat the flesh of the magic mushroom and to have those experiences is something that would have been going on throughout history before we were kind of, you know, civilized, is one way to put it, I imagine. But in terms of how English it is, and in terms of the black and white nature, I don't want to burst the bubble, but the black and white in this case was a budgetary issue more than anything else.
Fair, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there are limits to these things, but as well, it really did help me pin down the artwork, because I could say to the artists, look, don't even worry about color. Find other ways to get across what you want to express. And I think having those limitations really kind of pushes the artists in a way, as it pushed me as a writer, knowing I had no color to rely on, if you like, to try and be more descriptive with the writing and more descriptive in other ways.
And you do have some cool tables in here, I have to say, you know, talking about mind-altering substances. You have a table that is effects of mind-altering substances, which has a very nice range of different things that could alter your mind. You know, obviously, it's an RPG, you got mythical items, but you also delve into things like curses and rituals, specific flora and fauna. Talk to me a little bit about that, like blending that into a world that is very much based in psychedelia and old culture.
Okay, well, again, another real point I wanted to drive through in the creation of this book was I love books that are useful, first and foremost. I wanted a book that is going to be a companion at the gaming table. You know, I think we're all collectors and I like having pretty things on my shelf as much as the next person, but the only thing better than a prettier book is a useful book, in my opinion. And so, you know, you talk about all these random tables. It's really something that I wanted to get practical use from, and someone who buys the book or has it in their hand, if they're about to run a game, I want them to think, oh, you know what, there's probably a table in Caer Mundus somewhere I can use for something like this. So utility was the idea behind that all, and having a wide spread of random tables to use. You know, you can use your dice to generate things, you can cherry pick from them if you'd like. Just having a wide, broad amount of tables, the sheer number of stuff that's in here is really designed to help the GMs kind of, you know, boost the game during play. So, you know, you can flick open the book, go to, let's say your player ingests magic mushrooms or tobacco or cannabis or alcohol or any other number of the substances that are available in the world. The GM can open up the 2-page spread of effects of mind-altering substances, and with a few rolls of a D12 or a D10, you've got visions, you've got manifestations, you've got all these different ways that you can kind of bring that psychedelia to life. I think it's something that can be quite hard to describe, especially for newer GMs. And it's just it's a way to help and aid the player group in manifesting psychedelia, manifesting hallucinations, or in whatever form they may take.
And there's a chart you can roll to see what kind of dog you get, which I love.
Gotta love the dogs.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, there again, you know, dogs and horses were a really important part of a lot of the old Celtic cultures. And this book being a kind of amalgamation of various Celtic cultures, it doesn't claim to be historically accurate at all. But I just knew, you know, warriors go into battle, a lot of the time they have their warhounds with them. I better make some random generators for dogs and horses. So your dog's going to be different to the next guy's dog. I think that's just, it's fun, but it's also, it kind of speaks to the culture behind it, you know?
So all this is really interesting. And a lot of people these days are moving towards making system agnostic systems for their games. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about why you chose to go system agnostic versus any other system that you could have picked and nailed down?
I want it to be widely applicable. I want this to be something that everyone can use no matter what style of game they like to play, because despite the content, it has a variety of styles it can be used for. In the back of the book, I include suggestions to adapt it for Dungeons and Dragons settings, for more OSR type games like Labyrinth Lord. There's even some rules for what I termed weird OSR games, which is Troika, more or less. So there's plenty of different ways you can do it. I even have a friend, Rob from Realm of Fire podcast, who has told me he intends to use Cypher System to run this book. So there's plenty of different ways you can utilize it. No matter what system you use, the idea that I wanted to get across with it really is I wanted to capture the spirit of the kind of original fantasy and look at it in a new light, look at it from new angles. So, for example, one of my favorite things about this book, and one of the real ideas that inspired me and captured me and kept me writing it throughout, was it's a Bronze Age setting. So when humans go to war, they use wood, stone, bone, flint spears, clubs, oaken shields, that kind of thing. There is the rare occasion when a wealthy warrior will have brought his bronze sword onto the battlefield, which you might have generations of warriors who have never seen a sword before. And suddenly there's a warrior there with this gleaming metal object that is taking their friend's arms off with single blows. I was trying to capture the idea of there must have been a point in history where someone had never seen a sword before and then saw a sword for the first time. And how terrifying that must have been to just see a shiny object destroying your friends with little to no effort would have been unheard of because people have been beating each other to death with clubs. So to us, a sword is quite commonplace now, and it's not particularly interesting. But at the time, a sword was the most interesting thing on the battlefield. And that's something that I really wanted to get to. And it's the same with the character classes. I think bards are a bit of a joke in fantasy these days, but where did bards come from? You know, there was a time back in history when a bard was a revered member of society, and that's something I wanted to key into as well. If you walk onto a battlefield in Caer Mundus and there's a bard there, you better watch out. Everyone notices he's there. Everyone's terrified of this guy. The character classes that are included in the book don't have access to magic other than the bard, who can wield magic in combat, if you like, as a sort of active magic user. So musicians are feared on the battlefield more so than any other, and I think that's
as they should be.
Certainly as they should be, yeah. So, I'm trying to take the ideas that we know and have got to a point where everyone's kind of bored with them and say, look, at one point, this idea had to come from somewhere, and there's still magic to be found there if we know where to look. And Caer Mundus tries to delve into that and to take things that we know and to make them interesting again.
Well, very cool. Where can our listeners find this if they want to pick it up?
So please do pick it up because it's a great book. You can visit the web store for my own podcast, humanenergyfield.bigcartel.com. That's humanenergyfield.bigcartel.com, which is the only place you're able to get this online. It is stocked in certain retailers in the UK, but global buyers will need to visit that web store to get themselves a copy. If you are as yet undecided, you can visit DriveThru RPG, where there is a free PDF teaser that I put together called Votive Offerings. And that just has some quests. It has my favorite bit of writing I've done for Caer Mundus in it, that PDF does, as well as some creatures and a few adventures that you can run through. And if you like the idea of it, then you can go and get yourself the full book.
Well, very cool. Where can our listeners find you on the social media?
So I traverse the digital world by Gamma Valley on Instagram. And you can also check out Human Energy Field podcast on Instagram as well, where me and my friend run our own RPG podcast. Not as well-known or far-reaching as yours, of course, but we do our own thing here in the UK.
Well, very cool. This is another Indie RPG elevator pitch brought to you by our friends over at Exalted Funeral. Henry, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
So this was another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG podcast. Stu, where can the people find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG. I don't really post about board games, but I do think that Escape the Dark Castle is going to show up there eventually. You should buy this one for Christmas. It's a good one. You can play it by yourself too. It's a solo game.
Very cool. And you can find me on the Twitter at John McGuire RPG and on Instagram at John McGuire RPG as well. I'm posting more because I have something to promote. My Kickstarter for Point Nemo is wrapping up this Thursday. So if you haven't yet, definitely boogie on down to Kickstarter and get yourself in on Point Nemo. You could also check out my previous adventure, Rocket to Russia, right now on Exalted Funeral. If you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. And if you really like the show, Want to become a patron? Patreon.com/vintagerpg. We've got a behind the scenes look at Stu's book, still tentatively titled Experience Points. We've got a behind the scenes look at my RPG 321 action. We've got early release episodes. We've got some cool videos. We got some other cool stuff in the works. And we've got a killer Discord community that we'd love for you to be a part of. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dego West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.